Taking a look at this right now, you're probably thinking, oh look at that, Crash Bandicoot 2 or 3 for PlayStation 1. However, you'd be mistaken. This in fact isn't Crash from PlayStation 1, but it's rather a fan game made entirely in the Unity engine. Now, I've covered quite a few different Crash Bandicoot fan projects over the course of time here on YouTube, and quite simply put, I have never seen a fan game to this degree of quality. When I'm mentioning fan games, I'm not just saying exclusive to Crash Bandicoot, but I'm meaning in the overall realm of video game fan games. This is known as Crash Bandicoot Back in Time, created by a small group of people, released last year in 2023, with the purpose of trying to better understand how to develop a platforming game within the Unity engine. They thought, what better way to do that than to replicate one of the greatest platformers of all time, Crash Bandicoot. So by studying the OG Crash Bandicoot games inside and out, as well as taking a bunch of assets from the original 3 Crash games, this is what they've come up with. This could genuinely pass as like a mini sequel to those original 3 Crash games. It contains a Crash 2 styled warp room with 10 traditional levels. All of these levels take the themes and assets from the original 3 Crash games. Each level contains a gem for breaking all crates, the traditional bonus stages, flashback tapes, which work the same way in Crash 4. If you progress far enough into a level without dying, you'll be able to collect the flashback tape, which then in return unlocks an even harder challenge level back in the warp room. There is a total of 10 of these. Hidden away within the first 5 levels, there's also Trials of Uka Uka collectibles that you can find in hidden spots. These will unlock 5 new levels, which are time trials at the basement level of the warp room. And of course, we have colored gems for the last 5 levels. So in total, that's 25 stages to play through. What I found the most impressive about this entire thing though is just how close it feels to those OG games. Just controlling Crash is almost, not completely, but almost a one-to-one feeling of those original games. It's basic Crash Bandicoot. You've got the jump, the spin, the slide, and the slide jump. Jumping on enemies, jumping on crates, breaking crates, the general physics of just playing this game feels so close to OG Crash. And while I'm sure that a lot of those original animations across those 3 games have been ripped and imported into Unity engine, it would have been entirely up to the wizard power of these devs in order to somehow code the game so that it feels like Crash Bandicoot. Like at first, you would think that this is just a mod for Crash 2 or Crash 3, or the devs have somehow managed to reverse engineer the original Crash engine and make their own thing within it. But no, this is just entirely Unity, which baffles me. Interestingly, there's 2 ways to control Crash here. Now the first thing is you'll obviously want to be playing with a controller. Criminal if you're using keyboard, that's just no way to do it, it's got to be controller. You can use the D-pad for the traditional Crash Bandicoot movement. This is the most optimal way to play OG Crash. But of course, we've got an analog stick, and in the original Crash games, looking at Crash 2 and Crash 3, analog stick support was there, but there wasn't multi-directional movement for Crash. The analog stick was basically just emulating D-pad movement. So if you're using the analog stick, there is multi-directional movement. I will say it feels kind of cursed to not just be bound to only 8 different directions while my brain thinks that I'm playing original Crash, even though this is technically not original Crash. Now the game doesn't take that long to get through. It's a pretty short experience. Like I said, 10 traditional levels, but looking at the flashback tapes and the Trials of Uka Uka, whew! They're definitely going to put your Crash Bandicoot skills to the test. The same way that Crash 4 handles its flashback tapes, these are meant to be like the Uber challenge levels of the game, and some of them in Crash 4 are just completely grueling. Achieving 106% in Crash 4 is hands down one of the hardest video game challenges of all time. So I feel like the devs have taken some inspiration from that idea in Crash 4 and have implemented it here into Back in Time. Yeah, these levels are really hard. There's a bunch of neat settings here that we can play around with to change up the visuals. We can add in scan lines to sort of emulate the feeling of playing on a CRT display. We can even toggle affine warping on or off. For a lot of PS1 games, quite often the visuals and textures of a game would be warped and would jitter depending on the camera's perspective. This is mainly to do with the hardware limitations, but became a staple point of retro PlayStation visual. And now in modern times, this has actually become a modern visual style for quite a few indie games that seek to emulate that PlayStation 1 look. So this is actually a setting that we can turn on or off. We can also toggle post-processing and dithering. There's even a slider here for vertex inaccuracy, another thing to do with the unique look of PlayStation 1 visuals. Looking at assets up close in PlayStation 1 games, they tend to look pretty warped. They would jitter and wobble about, and so this slider allows us to emulate, again, that look similar to affine warping, and the result is, yeah, terrifying. We've got a slider to emulate the look of lower resolution. If you're trying to achieve more of the PlayStation 1 look, then you can, and sliders for color depth and subtractive fade. There are even quality levels here for the textures in the game. So this package is pretty impressive. It's clearly coming from a dedicated, passionate group of people who are hardcore fans of the original Crash games. But it gets even better. In 2015, Nintendo released Super Mario Maker, basically a Mario tool to allow people to create their own custom 2D Mario stages, and for people to be able to share these custom-made stages online, basically meaning that people now have infinite Mario content. So the devs of Back in Time thought to themselves, well, what if Crash Bandicoot had something like that? Considering that there are 2D sections in those original Crash games, we can basically just apply the same concept and allow people to create their own 2D Crash Bandicoot levels. So one of the big features here in Back in Time is the Crash Creator. Literally the same thing as Super Mario Maker, it's just Crash Bandicoot. This allows you to craft your very own stages with the various amounts of different terrain blocks, traps, obstacles, enemies, crates, the typical collectibles. There's a lot of different options here to craft your own stage, and it's incredibly easy to just pick up and learn straight off the bat, just as something like Super Mario Maker is. Furthermore, if you make your way to the top of the warp room, there's a dedicated room here where you can set 5 levels to the custom levels you create. There's also 40 odd levels that are already pre-installed with the game, along with being able to play other user-created levels. You can't download levels straight from the game itself. You'll have to find someone's level somewhere online. There is actually a dedicated Discord for this, but it's as easy as dragging a file and dropping it into a folder. Additionally too, this game can also be played on Android. There is a fully working Android version of the game. Now the game has been receiving updates since its initial release last year, adding quality of life improvements and new things into the creator system. Right now it's on version 0.95, and the devs plan to stop development on the game and basically finalize it as a completed project once version 1.0 releases. So it would seem as if there is still one more update to come. But considering that this is a completely free game over on itch.io, and that they're just using this as a means to further educate themselves on platformer titles being developed in Unity, this is one of those rare internet gems. So for anyone interested to play this for themselves, I'll leave the link to it in the description down below. I'm a long-time Crash Bandicoot fan, growing up playing those original PlayStation 1 entries, not just the first 3, but CTR, Crash Bash, and going forward into the PlayStation 2 games. By the way, we need a Twin Sanity remaster. This right here is just a love letter to Crash fans. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe to the channel to keep up with everything going on here. Check out my other garbage social media platforms. A big thank you to my wonderful Turkey-tastic patrons. I hope you're all having a fantastic day, and we'll talk real soon.